Welcome to CharityVillage Connects. I'm Mary Barrell. Nonprofits in Canada are notoriously slow when it comes to investing in new technology. Will they be left behind when it comes to the new AI tools that are poised to revolutionize our world? In this episode of CharityVillage Connects, we take a hard look at what AI has to offer nonprofit organizations, as well as its potential drawbacks. Is there a way to responsibly harness the power of AI for social good? To discuss these important issues, please welcome Jason Shim. Jason serves as Chief Digital Officer of the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, or CCNDR, which aims to build a digitally enabled nonprofit sector where Canada's nonprofits use data and tech to advance their mission and maximize their impact. As an experienced digital executive, Jason provides his leadership to help organizations stay ahead of the technology curve. He successfully championed organization-wide digital-first approaches for nonprofits and has developed marketing, fundraising, and program delivery. Welcome to the podcast, Jason.
Thanks for having me, Mary.
Well, let's start off with a little background on what the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resiliency does. Can you introduce the organization to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, or CINDR, is, like you mentioned, all for building a digitally enabled nonprofit sector and for advancing data and tech among organizations to advance their mission and multiply their impact. And so really it's about galvanizing people and mobilizing funding to support impactful initiatives. And so what that looks like is convening diverse experts across sectors, prioritizing ideas that can make a broad impact, and helping nonprofits adopt new technologies. And so this is really recognizing that having each individual organization trying to go it alone or trying to navigate this can be a lot of duplicated effort. And so approaching this at a sectoral level can be more effective. And so that's why CINDR exists, to bridge the gap.
And, we've been hearing a lot about AI and ChatGPT this year is in all the news. Can you explain in plain language, or provide us an introduction to AI technology? What is it, and why is it in the news so much these days?
Yeah, so in plain terms, AI really refers to technology that can perform tasks that would typically require human intelligence. So thus, the artificial intelligence part of AI. So this can range from things like creating, thinking, decision-making at at a kind of computer or systems level. So historically, things like optical character recognition, which allows you to detect and recognize text on a page, or things like speech recognition, they may not have necessarily been described as AI, but it now falls under the broad general umbrella. And what's different is that in the last 10 years, there's been significant technology advancements and a convergence of a few things that I'll describe. So the first is the wide availability of data, which is used to train models, which help build AI to make it work. The second is advancements in computing power. So we've seen some significant advancements in the last 10 years. And the third are innovations in approaches and algorithms among AI researchers. So the convergence of these things has really led to an explosion in AI and capabilities, especially in recent years. And so the things that we've seen in the last few years in particular, like ChatGPT or Google's Bard, or Meta just recently came out with a model, Llama, as well, which have these really interesting text generation capabilities where you can have a Q&A with an AI text generator, or image generation like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or DALL-E. And so those are the kinds of systems where you can type in what you would like to see in an image, and then it'll be automatically generated through AI. And so broad definition of AI is that it encompasses a lot right now, including from text to images to analyzing data and providing predictions, but it all falls under that general umbrella of things that typically have been done by humans, but can be now augmented by AI or help accelerate that process.
And in terms of it being embraced by the sector, does CCNDR have any sort of understanding or anecdotal kind of basis to understand just how many nonprofits or how deeply they've actually been able to implement AI technology within their organizations?
Mhm. So I think that there's first a very wide variance of nonprofits, because the description of nonprofits, I mean, that encompasses every thing from like organizations that are, you know, maybe under $100,000 a year that are completely volunteer run, all the way to organizations that are significantly larger with budgets in the millions or tens of millions as well. So first of all, I think that there's a wide variance among nonprofits in terms of how well equipped they are with technology in general and how quickly they can adapt to technology in addition to AI. So I believe that many of the larger organizations that are quite well resourced, you know, have, you know, anecdotally, you know, have been seeing that there've definitely been some explorations on AI for, you know, kind of day-to-day operations and things that they can use for very specific functions there. But I think that among organizations as a whole and nonprofits, like there's definitely an awareness, you know, with tools like ChatGPT that have gained mass market awareness as well, is hearing folks that are very interested in exploring these in further detail, and some who have taken steps to implement kind of basic explorations and pilot programs as well within the organizations. I think that some of the adoption of AI may be straightforward and out of the box for some. And what I mean by that is that there is some software that is already quite widely used by nonprofits that has integrated AI. And so by that measure, I think that there are some organizations that they may be using the software and they may see that it pops up and it's like, hey, you know, there's a new AI feature here. And thus, you know, that would put them into the category of exploring some of that. So some of the examples that come to mind are a pretty widely used one is Canva, which folks use for image editing and such. I know that that is one platform that has integrated some AI capabilities in there. And another is, I know that Adobe's Photoshop has adopted, you know, AI into its generative fill for accelerating some of the creation of image assets. And so I think that for some out-of-the-box software, there's definitely some explorations and adoption there. Would I say it's widespread? I don't think it's quite there yet, but I think it would be just a matter of time for some of the out-of-the-box software that nonprofits are already using, which may integrate AI in the coming years.
That's really quite interesting. You know, certainly there are a lot of those applications that we may be using every day on the software that we license for our operations that we may not even be really aware of the fact that they are actually functioning using using AI. I spoke to one expert who kind of said, really, in terms of the nonprofit sector, it needs to get moving now in terms of understanding and engaging with it and embracing it as part of its overall technological strategy and operations. Or they'll be left behind. What are your thoughts in terms of how quickly or effectively nonprofits might actually or should pick up the use of AI?
So I think that before we even get into the, you know, nonprofits embracing AI, I think that there's a higher order kind of conversation around like embracing technology in general, where I think that AI is, you know, what is in the here and now currently, but I think that there's many organizations that you know, need to also examine, you know, how are they embracing technology in general, or what are their internal systems and processes and capacities to adopt technology. So, you know, I think that if a nonprofit is struggling with basic hardware to run basic operations, you know, something like an AI conversation is, you know, so far down the line that I'm not sure that it would be the first consideration necessarily until, you know, the basic operations gets set up. But, you know, to your point, I think that it is a very real kind of consideration too, where, you know, that there may be some significant gaps within, you know, organizations for when thinking about AI, that there's an additional consideration of technology adoption in general, because it has that multiplying exponential effect that the gap potentially can grow wider if because the organizations that are nimble or are kind of up to speed on the technology side are able to take advantage of some of these emerging AI technologies, which can accelerate the work significantly. I'm thinking of the kinds of technologies like I mentioned around text generation or image generation, that if you can come up with 20 drafts in the time that it typically would take to produce one for review, that is something that an organization could certainly benefit from. But in order to benefit from that, the technology house needs to be put in order, and part of it is not necessarily even the technology itself. It's ensuring that there's organizational buy-in, that change management is looked after, that people are receiving the training, that folks are sold on it, that the board is aligned, that it's all mission aligned. So there's so many considerations with the adoption of AI, but there's certainly many opportunities, I think, that present with integrating AI into an organization.
Well, let's talk about those opportunities. What are some of the advantages that could exist for organizations that are able to embrace AI?
Yeah, so I'll start at a very high level. I'll share some use cases from specific organizations. So I think that for organizations like Kids Help Phone, I mean, they have recently been highlighting that as part of their systems using AI, they're able to use AI systems to analyze conversations and triage based on certain trigger words to advance conversations to the front of the line that may be higher in priority. So that's a very specific use case to program delivery that AI can impact and provide better service delivery for organizations. Another is the Furniture Bank. And so, the Furniture Bank had used some generative AI to create images because the process of organizing an entire photo shoot and the challenges and of having to do as well as the expense that it actually could provide a more effective marketing resource for Furniture Bank by having these AI generated images for the marketing materials. The other is around fundraising platforms. There are many more kind of fundraising platforms that have either integrated or have indicated that it's on their roadmap with regards to things like analyzing prospects for fundraising, as well as moves management within within the fundraising context. So determining everything from when is a good time to potentially make an ask, drafting up some communications to donors, all the way to just getting a better sense of the data and things like that. And finally, there are things on the day-to-day operations. So things like, if someone is in an operational capacity within a marketing department, like I mentioned before, like creating images, using language models to draft text. Some of the AI models around voice models make it easier to generate narration that rather than having to record over and over again certain things, or for editing, that it's now possible to train a voice model based on your voice or of a staff member's voice, and have the audio automatically generated that way. Things like grant applications certainly come to mind with regards to text generation, and analyzing large bodies of text. So for any nonprofits that may have a government relations department that is furiously, going through budget documents every time a federal budget is announced to determine how it may impact their organization, is that an AI a tool can provide a very helpful resource to help accelerate the analysis, and also providing helpful context to augment teams like that. And so, I think that all these things that I just described, all the way from, high strategic level, program delivery, all the way to, kind of the day-to-day operations, these are all things that fall under the AI umbrella that are touched upon in terms of how it can accelerate and augment the work within nonprofits.
I had a very interesting conversation with Dan Kershaw from the Furniture Bank, and he's very much, I guess, an enthusiast of exploring the use of AI in the operations of his charity, and it was quite fascinating. One of the things that we talked about is something I want to touch on with you is that while it is such an exciting prospect now, and a shiny object that we're all being so fascinated with, it's also not always positive. Certainly, there are discussions about some of the problems with AI, at least in its current form. What kind of drawbacks should our listeners be aware of if they're starting to use AI in their work? And I want to include ideas around ethical issues or the quality of the data that is being used by AI to actually generate some of these solutions that we're talking about. Maybe you could help us explore those issues.
Yeah. So I'll start with what you mentioned around the quality of data as it relates to things around ethics and AI. Is that AI is somewhat like a mirror that is held up to how humans make decisions. So earlier I was talking about how defining AI is essentially machines that are making decisions that were typically made by humans. Is that when we're creating these models that we're telling the AI, hey, this is how we think, this is how we do things here. And so if the data is reflecting a biased worldview, or something that is not ethical, that will be reflected in the outputs of it as well. And the challenge around that is with AI is that sometimes it may not be abundantly clear that how it comes to the decisions that it makes. So having visibility and understanding of the data that's going into it and how it's coming up with some of these conclusions is really important. I think that one of the things that folks should be aware of is that if you hand over everything to the AI without an understanding of how it came to that decision, that's a potential risk. So I think in building processes around AI, organizations really need to think about how they keep a human in the loop for some of these things. That if you are putting something into a model and then just accepting it without reviewing, the results or hitting publish on it, sight unseen, that's a risk to the organization, and it may actually reflect biases that may have been present in the data if it wasn't properly kind of considered. So I think it has broader implications for organizations too, where it really underscores the importance of really take into consideration how data is collected, or even things like research and survey design. That how do we ensure unbiased kind of inputs into a system that we're hoping to have unbiased outputs as well. Within the context of nonprofits, I think that understanding that AI, like any other technology, is fundamentally a tool. So I think having a clear understanding of what is to be done and how the tool will help is really important, because otherwise, if you get too stuck in the tool for its own sake and you're kind of adopting the tool and using it, sometimes you need to also take a step back and really be aware of, okay, like how does this actually advance the mission? And like, what is it that we're setting out to do around this? And lastly, with regards to things that folks need to be aware of is the human element of it. So I think with any adoption of technology, there's that certain element of change management that needs to be accounted for. That within organizations, there's always people, and people when adopting technology, they need to know how they're going to use it, how they're going to adjust to it, and there are some very real concerns that I think folks may have that may need to be addressed along the way. So as I mentioned before, helping people understand, how is this technology actually going to help me in my job, the organization as a whole, and some feedback that I have heard articulated as well is, in addition to how it will impact my job, is is AI going to replace me? And so those are very real concerns that folks have, and I think that there's a role for organizations to play in helping to navigate that change, and working with folks to make sure that AI usage within organizations is helping people do their jobs and helping it to advance the mission itself. And when using AI in work, especially around language models, and some of you may have already experienced this way as you're experimenting and exploring some of these language models, is that sometimes when you put in a question, it can be confidently incorrect. So it can produce a response that may have a loose relationship with reality, but it's going to say it with an authority that may not be actually true. So those are the kinds of things too that folks need to be aware of, that you really need to have those processes in place to make sure that some of the outputs are actually valid.
I've met some humans that so confidently state their position that they become a lot more persuasive than their actual arguments justify. But I'd like to look at a little bit about the barriers that organizations in the nonprofit sector might face when attempting to implement AI technology. We know already that nonprofits typically struggle with it, both from a resources base, a mindset, change management, it being almost a diversion from their mission. It's tough for a lot of nonprofits to embrace technology generally. Like, what are the specific barriers related to AI technology that concern you?
Yeah, so with AI technology, I mean, that's part of the bigger whole of technology adoption for sure. And the things that immediately come to mind are the classic ones that always come to mind with regards to technology adoption, around funding, resourcing within an organization, capacity, and training. So those are some of the kind of big high level considerations that present as barriers for organizations. And I think that it's helpful to also get a sense too, where some of the stats around organizations in that. So Canada Helps did a digital skills survey in 2021, and some of the numbers I think may help paint a picture about what some of the barriers may be. And so in this survey, it had 25% of organizations rating their knowledge of general office software as very good. So that's 25%. That's 54% felt that they didn't have enough funding to make greater use of software and digital tools, and less than half, or 38%, had already integrated use of computer technology, software, digital tools, or other software-empowered processes. And so when we look at the current state of some organizations, albeit there are some organizations that are well on their way, that have been on the digital road for quite a while. But in terms of the barriers that present, I mean, some of it is that within organizations, there may be limited capacity to even have the AI conversation. Much less, they may still be having conversations around, hey, how do I get a computer that is working well, that is reliable on a day-to-day basis. And another is, it's, even if AI is implemented within an organization, it's that training element that is really critical for organizations. So it's not just about throwing technology in front of folks and expecting, oh, AI is going to take care of it all. It's that, even in the last year or so, that, how AI can be used has so has evolved quite a bit. So, how are we going to ensure that within an organization there's ongoing training, support, and development? How do we build these learning communities as well within organizations and within our professional networks to learn about all the emerging ways that AI can be used, emerging practices, also building broader frameworks for people to be doing all these things. I think it'd be fair to say that it's a bit of a Wild West currently, in that there's new technology that's out there, and folks are figuring out how it can be used generally. But the next conversation after that is, how can we use this technology effectively for organizations? And whether it's something like AI or even the internet itself, when having those conversations like 20 plus years ago, it's things like how do we implement policies within organizations, broader guidelines, and how do we ensure that everyone in the organization is familiar with them. So I think at its current point right now, some of the barriers are some of the barriers that have existed for a while around funding, training, and internal capacity within organizations around technology.
I'd like to explore, you made a very important point, I think, in terms of actually ensuring that the human being that's using the AI technology is able to, have enough transparency or understanding of how it's generating certain solutions or products output from the input of the data that's being provided to it. And that human element is so critical to the proper operation of AI technology and its continuing learning, I suppose. Somebody I spoke to said AI should be considered sort of a co-pilot as opposed to a pilot. That you really have to have it. It's useful to be of assistance to you, but you're still the individual who is driving the plane, or flying the plane and driving the bus. I wonder what your thoughts are around that, and what leaders or people working with AI or thinking about it should be thinking of as they start using it.
Absolutely. So I think when organizations and individuals are looking at using AI in the context of nonprofit organizations, is looking at it from a risk perspective. And so when looking at using AI, I really like the framing that you shared around using as a co-pilot kind of thing, because ultimately, if something is generated and let's say there's any issues with it, there still needs to be someone who's accountable for that output at the end of the day, because you can't necessarily just point at the AI and be like, oh well, it was the AI part. So I think definitely having that understanding that, okay, just like you're using a word processor, that you can't necessarily blame things on the word processor. It's like it's how you use the technology that really needs to be understood. And so when thinking about, what organizations need to do for their understandings of the risk, I think there's a lot of things to be drawn sometimes from when I think about how fictional narratives talk about, how do you handle kind of magical forces, is that there can sometimes be this set of guidelines that is formed. And so in the context of, say, Star Wars, there's a kind of light side and dark side kind of thing. And at the end of the day, using technology can be like using the Force, in that you have choices that ultimately you need to make, and they can be light side, for good, dark side for bad, or some of them can be categorized within neutral, kind of in the middle. It's neither here nor there. But it carries along with it. I think there's a lot of parallels that can be drawn where it's like, hey, the dark side is often associated with like, the what is quick, what is easy, and it's very tempting to do those things. And there can be guidelines that can be written around that to guide people towards like, hey, if you're using this to write an entire thing and publish it sight unseen, don't do that. That's kind of a dark side kind of usage, whereas light side is taking that kind of co-pilot behavior and letting it kind of guide the work that's being done, but ultimately it's really channeling it and using that human element to connect it to the mission to fully embrace the power that AI can bring to an organization as well. So I think being clear for an organization on what its internal processes are is really important, because when you think about AI as a tool to automate things, if an organization doesn't have its internal processes either documented or understood, then throwing AI at processes that are not well understood is just going to create more noise and more trouble. So when looking at some of the technology, I think again, that taking that step back and really analyzing what is it that we're setting out to do, what is it that we're looking to accelerate, and going from there. And I think it can be done in a very kind of methodical way to address those things. Going back to the issues around risk, is that I think that folks also need to be aware of where they're putting their information, and if there's an opt-out clause for using it for a training model, that organizations should certainly be looking into that, or how their privacy is protected there. I think that for some organizations that have been in the news, where they have, I know there's some organizations that have instructed folks not to put any data into some of these language models that are available online, because that it could be used for future training that could emerge, that it may present some issues with privacy and such. So I think that some of the AI providers are looking to build products that address some of the privacy issues, but I think it's also on the organizations to be asking those questions around, like, hey, when using this, is this information going to be put into a future model for, is it going to end up in an output that someone else is going to be asking a question in the future that we may not necessarily, have wanted that to appear. So those are some of the things that I think organizations need to be watching out for.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that analogy to the Star Wars and the use of the Force as it relates to AI. And we certainly don't want to see nonprofits in their AI journey meeting Darth Vader. That's certainly not in anybody's interest to have that sort of dark side explored. But in all seriousness, you raise a very good point. I mean, there's a lot of issues to think about, including certainly on the privacy front. Donor information, transactions, privacy matters related to perhaps individuals that are clients of the nonprofit or the charity. All of these sorts of elements that, without proper supervision or care, that could in fact, I guess, be used and improperly inputted into the AI software. I would say that, perhaps the nonprofit sector is even more vulnerable given the nature of the work that they often do. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think that definitely on the nonprofit side of things, that given the data that some nonprofits have access to, and things that need to be extra careful around some of those considerations. I think that when thinking about some of these concerns, it's that these may be embedded within existing technology policies within organizations around checking for privacy and data protection and things. So it may not necessarily be that an entirely separate AI kind of category is necessarily needed, but at the very least, the question should be posed around, like, hey, for some of our existing technology policies or acceptable use policies, how can AI factor into this? And these are documents that need to be reviewed as well in light of changing circumstances. So I think in light of technology that can suddenly ingest a huge amount of information, and produce outputs or predictive analytics, that question around like, okay, yeah, like how does that data get used or repurposed? How are people compensated for, if that applies for that? How long, will it be retained? Those types of questions that typically apply for regular data collection and considerations are even more important with keeping AI in mind as well.
Yeah, and in relation to the policies that you're talking about, I guess certainly there's been a lot of discussion about that and the ethical use of AI. And some organizations, including the Furniture Bank that we've mentioned already, are developing things like the ethical use charters or policies that actually directly relate to the ethical use of AI. I wonder what your thoughts are about that. Do we need, is there a need for a much larger, I guess, nonprofit approach to this in terms of developing that?
Mm-hmm. I think that it depends on the organization. So I think that for Furniture Bank's ethical use charter, that they're very ahead of the curve in terms of their usage of AI, and also using or kind of delineating how it will be used within the organization. And so, as each organization has, a different mission and different approaches for how it does the work, I think that this kind of goes to that larger conversation around how do organizations understand their mission and their values in relation to how that extends through technology. So if technology is understood as an amplifier of, work that is done or values of an organization, I think that a worthwhile question for organizations to also examine is, hey, how are we using technology in general that really reflect the values of our organization in a meaningful way? And so AI, I think, is part of that broad spectrum of, in the work that is done. If you are, if one of your values is that, you want to make sure that everything is equitable within your organization in the services that you provide. I mean, those are some broader conversations around like if everything is only provided in a certain technology format, that may be limiting access to certain folks within that you may provide services to, and so really taking a look at how technology is used in some of those contexts. So, as in terms of how AI relates to that. I think it's whether it's a charter or a policy or a guideline for an organization, it's I would say organizations should not stick their head in the sand and just completely ignore it. But that they should be having these conversations that it may vary for each organization. So it may be a full charter, it may be a policy, it may be a guideline, or it may be an additional clause to their existing technology policy or acceptable use policy. But at the very least, the conversation needs to be had for organizations because it's not an if, but a when at this point, when conversations like this need to be explored for organizations.
Well, now to sort of wrap up, I would love to sort of ask you to do a bit of crystal ball gazing into the future, and what do you see from your perspective? I mean, you've had extensive experience in this. How do you think AI could assist nonprofits with their work and in achieving and delivering on their missions? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, I think I see this on a few different levels. So I think first, the day-to-day work of an individual within a nonprofit in the future, given the technology and where it's going currently, is that they're going to have an assistant at their side. So kind of like a co-pilot where, if you're looking to put together, a document or say a presentation or such, that, you will most likely will be looking at technology where, there might be a document that's already been generated or written, and you point to it and be like, create presentation, based on this, and that kind of thing. So on an operational level, like many of the things that I think used to take a lot of time are going to be drastically reduced with regards to how long it takes. So whether that be on the image generation side, or integrations that may have been took a while to coordinate, should be you should be able to use natural language to articulate what it is that you're looking for. I think more broadly is that we can expect to see that there'll be more analytical capabilities for crunching data. So for organizations that are dealing with a lot of data, it still requires quite a bit of time and analysis and specific wrangling to make sense of all of it. And I think we've already seen some significant advancement in terms of how AI and technology can help parse that data and find patterns, or highlight areas to look further into. I think that those capabilities are going to become more accessible to more organizations. That right now, it may be limited to organizations that can have the resources to have a research team, or someone who's dedicated on the research side of things. But I think the tools will make it more accessible to more organizations. And I think lastly, in terms of looking into the crystal ball, I think that the further out you look at that, it gets a bit hazier in terms of how folks are going to be using it. But I think that there are some patterns that we can look to in terms of determining how people are going to be using it. And I like to use the Olympic motto, faster, higher, stronger, for kind of guiding how people think about technology. So as folks are thinking about how AI will be used in the future, or whatever technology, as it applies to nonprofits, I think that when there's opportunities to help things go faster or more efficiently, that's where we'll see AI continue to be used to raise higher revenues for organizations. So in terms of resource development for organizations, technology, AI, and otherwise, that's a natural kind of channel that things will move towards. And lastly, around building stronger relationships. And that last part, I think, is really important to continue exploring, because going back to the point about not using AI for its own sake, but how can we use AI to really build the human relationship, where we're not going to replace a coffee meeting with sending an AI bot necessarily, or maybe there's going to be an experiment in which people do try that, but that's not necessarily something that I see that where I see the technology going. It's how do we use it to build on those relationships that we have that help support our organizations. And so I think organizations will need to stay nimble and responsive to changes in technology, so that they can take advantage of all the benefits that AI may have.
And any final advice you'd like to leave with our audience as it relates to if they're about to embrace AI or exploring the idea, what is your advice to them?
Yeah, my advice would be to stay open and to experiment, even on a personal basis. I mean, many of the technologies that are emerging and that are out there are widely available for folks to sign up and use. So even if you're signing up for an account and putting in some non-private information to just get a sense of what's out there, it gives you a glimpse into what might be possible. And so my recommendation to folks is, jump in there and really, at the very least, experiment a bit, so that, as people bring their expertise and their background to the technology, that, after experimenting with it a little bit, I think it helps spark some ideas around, whatever type of organization people may be in, whatever position people may be in, that it'll help make those connections around having these bigger conversations around, it's like, hey, what if this would be possible? And, I think that's what will really help to kind of connect this emerging technology with real problems and issues that people are looking to address. So yeah, getting out there and experimenting.
Well, Jason, I've started experimenting with ChatGPT, and it's been quite fascinating and fun. And I've just had a great time discussing these very important issues with you today. I really appreciate your expertise. I'm sure nonprofits across the country will benefit from your insights and all of your experience. So thank you so much for joining us on Charity Village Connects.
Great. Thanks so much, Mary.